Well, a big announcement from Ron Paul today. He announced he would stop spending money on active campaigning, but he has not given up fighting for delegates. We've already seen plenty of surprises at state Republican conventions in terms of Ron Paul winning the majority of delegates in states that originally went to Romney or Santorum. Well, this past weekend, we also saw violence break out between Romney and Paul's supporters. Not to mention one of Mitt Romney's sons, Josh Romney, getting booed off the stage at the Arizona Republican Party convention. Take a look.
Make sure that it says paid for Romney and that it's green. I appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
That was Mitt Romney's third out of 5 sons, had to cut his speech short after all that booing. Now, we've been taking a look at Ron Paul for a while, saying just because people have called this race, have put it to bed, it's not quite time to forget about Ron Paul. And I want to talk about this more today with Wayne Allen Root, a 2008 Libertarian vice presidential nominee. He also wrote the book, The Conscience of a Libertarian, Empowering the Citizen Revolution with God, Guns, Gold, and Tax Cuts. Wayne, let's talk first about today's announcement. Is this simply Ron Paul not wanting to spend the money he didn't have, or is it something else?
No, it's over. I mean, I was planning to tell you even before the announcement, Christine, that Mitt Romney will be the GOP nominee. But I'm a big fan of Ron Paul. I love the guy, and I'm a big fan of anybody who fights relentlessly to the very end, to the last gun, and he outlasted Rick Santorum, he outlasted Newt Gingrich, Rick Perry, Herman Cain, you name it, even Donald Trump to some effect. So I really love the guy. I think he's great, but Mitt Romney is the Republican nominee, and now this announcement makes it 100% clear. But Ron Paul is fighting for more than a nomination. It's a long-term battle to instill libertarian values on American culture, on the economy, and most importantly in the Republican Party. And I think he's done a great job of that, and the battle will go on.
Wayne, it sounds to me like the establishment Republican Party has gotten to you. You're singing their lines. We spoke to some other sort of grassroots Ron Paul supporters who say, hey, we still have, the state conventions in Minnesota and Michigan to watch. What's going on here?
Well, listen, I think this is all about something very different than winning. Ron Paul knows he's not winning, and you probably would have said that to me if he hadn't backed out. But now that he's backed out, it's pretty obvious I'm right. It is Mitt Romney's nomination, but Ron Paul's looking for other things. Number one, a long-term message. Number two, his supporters are trying a 50-state takeover in the future of the Republican Party. It's a long-term battle. They're girded for it. I think that's great. And number three, bargaining power at the convention. That's what this is about. Will Mitt Romney have a prominent speech in will Ron Paul have a prominent speech in prime time? Will Ron Paul have a role in a Romney administration, or does he choose to go third party? I think it's pretty clear at this point he's not going third party. So if that's the case, will Rand Paul have a big role in the Republican Party moving forward? And could Ron Paul snag a nomination, an announcement by Mitt Romney that he will get the position, a plum position of Fed chief or Treasury secretary? Maybe a long shot to some people, but to me it would sure be a great thing and a fresh way to look at politics. I think Ron Paul would make a great Fed chief and a great Treasury secretary. So to get his supporters in line behind Romney, my guess is he's trying to keep on the pressure and keep up the bargaining power.
Well, it is interesting, too, when you talk about getting his supporters in line, because certainly they were anything but. Over the weekend, we showed video earlier of Mitt Romney's son getting booed off the stage. I also want to play part of a small local news story. This is something that happened over the weekend in Oklahoma.
This woman right here, Mrs. has physically assaulted me.
The video you're watching is being recorded by a woman who says she was just hit in the back. This wasn't the only commotion during the Oklahoma Republican State Convention. This Ron Paul supporter says he was hit in the head by a 70-year-old Mitt Romney supporter. Here's video moments after the altercation as officers defuse the situation.
All right, Wayne, I mean, we're seeing people throwing punches. We've always known that Ron Paul supporters are energetic. But what do you think? I mean, is what we saw over the weekend, is this a preview for what we might expect in Florida in August?
I don't think there'll be a lot of contention in Florida. It's been decided. It'll be Romney, and I think Ron Paul will get a nice role at this convention. I would recommend to Mitt Romney, I'm a Libertarian, not a Republican, but if I was in the GOP, I'd recommend to Mitt Romney that he embrace Ron Paul, give him a great speaking role, and possibly put him in a very important position like a Fed chief or some sort of major position in the Romney administration. If Romney's to win, he's ahead at this moment in the polls. I think Romney has one fear here, Christine, and the fear is my own Libertarian Party has nominated Gary Johnson as our presidential nominee, a two-term governor of New Mexico with the single most libertarian voting record in the country, with the exception of Ron Paul. So I think that he has a lot to lose, Mitt Romney, if he doesn't embrace and bring in that Ron Paul youth movement. It could very well wind up going to Gary Johnson, and I think Mitt better be very, very careful and forewarned that he don't take for granted, he doesn't take for granted the fact that libertarians have other choices in this election. Gary Johnson, by the way, a great candidate with, if you study his record in New Mexico, Christine, the single most fiscally conservative governor in modern political history.
Oh, we've had Gary Johnson on the show a number of times. We've spoken to him. Really interesting guy, certainly. But talk about, I mean, you talk about some of these libertarian voting records, libertarian values. What do you think, taking a look back the last 8 months to a year, I think that it's fair to say that some of Ron Paul's, ideals have really become a lot more mainstream. What do you think, Wayne, has been some of the most important things that he's really brought forward and brought forth in terms of discussion and future policy?
Well, certainly the Fed is the biggest one. I think the Fed has had a lot of mischief and a lot of negativity in the American economy. If you look at the #1 role of the Fed, Christine, it's to protect the value of the dollar. And since it was instituted in, I believe it was 1913, the value of the dollar is down by 95%. If the #1 goal of an institution is to protect the value and it's down by 95%, what do we need the Fed for? So #1, Ron Paul's been the one guy in the whole world screaming in the wilderness about the Fed for so many years. No one knew what he was talking about. Turned out he was exactly right. He's a guy that's been screaming about student loans. Turned out he was exactly right. That's a nightmare, an Armageddon about to befall the American economy. Over $1 trillion in student loan debt, and a lot of it's about to default. He was the guy screaming in the wilderness about subprime loans and the housing debacle, and he was right about that. I think he's right about the gold standard. We should get rid of the Fed and have a gold standard. And he's right about government spending, and all the debt would eventually turn into a cataclysmic event in Europe and eventually the United States. And look what was disclosed in the last week. Most people don't pay attention, Christine. Europe is going under. We may have to bail out an entire continent. Forget about
well, another thing, let me stop you really quick, Wayne. Another thing that Ron Paul has been screaming about for a long time, that the majority of Americans do seem to agree with, is the role of the U.S. government, the role of the U.S. in wars in other countries. Most of this country, at least at this point in 2012, seem to be done with the idea of past wars they want to wrap up and of getting involved in future wars. This is something that Ron Paul has made, his position on this has been loud and clear, and but for some reason that is something that the Republican Party itself, the establishment Republican Party, has had a really hard time wrapping their hands around. I mean, despite the fact that veterans, people who have served this country, have overwhelmingly given their financial support to Ron Paul. Talk a little bit about this juxtaposition about what's been happening.
Well, I'd say I'm probably the best example you could ever have on this TV show, because I was a traditional Republican my entire life, and I was very pro-war, and I've come a long way. I used to think Ron Paul was completely off base on this topic, and now I'm not 100% with Ron Paul. I'm not a believer in no war. I'm not a pacifist, but like Ron Paul, I'm a believer in we should have major cuts all across the board, including the defense budget, the Pentagon budget. We should ratchet down spending on foreign aid all around the world.
Wayne, what changed your mind?
Well, I think we're bankrupt. What changed my mind is I'm certainly not a pacifist mentality. I'm a pro-American capitalist and a patriot, so I don't think war is unnecessary. I think sometimes you have to fight wars. But, Christine, I don't know what we're doing in Afghanistan anymore. We've lost our focus. We shouldn't be there. I don't know what we're doing in Iraq. I'm not sure what we ever were doing in Iraq. In the end, treasure and bodies and lives have been wasted for what appears to me to be nothing. The average Americans gain nothing. So I've started to see the folly of fighting wars around the world just so we could spend more money on defense contractors. I think Ron has pulled me very far in his direction, and he's owed a debt of gratitude by the American people and by all the families of the soldiers. I think he's opened their eyes. Maybe you don't always take for granted America's always right, the American government's always right, and whatever the military says is always right. So, Ron, thank you.
Certainly tough, though, I know, for a lot of conservative Republicans, traditional, like you said, you used to be. This was one issue that was really tough for them to grapple with. Appreciate having you on the show today. Wayne Allen Root, 2008 Libertarian Vice Presidential nominee.